The Short Game is listener-supported on Patreon. If you'd like to support the show and join us on our Discord, head to theshortgame.net or patreon.com/theshortgame.
Welcome back to The Short Game. This is a show about short video games, games that respect your time. I'm Reagan Kelly, and I am joined this week by two excellent co-hosts, plus an exciting guest.
Laura Nash.
Nate Heininger.
And joining us this week is our bird correspondent and friend of the show, producer, and professional podcaster and radio personality, Mark Bramhill. How are you doing, Mark?
Great. So happy to join the show again. It's been too long.
It's been way too long. What happened?
What could have happened that would have delayed this?
Also, numerous life changes for everyone on the podcast, et cetera, et cetera. It's been too long since we did a proper Bird Week
I think that's the problem. That's the takeaway.
We are overdue for Bird Week.
Yeah, I don't think we can truly blame the pandemic on a show that's been remote from its inception. So
I blame the pandemic for literally everything at this point, and it always works. It's the perfect excuse for literally everything.
Yeah, I mean, it obviously was the pandemic's problem, but I think the learn here is that we need to bring back Bird Week. It's been too long, but Mark, so glad you joined us on, there's a bird game on this thing, so...
I was going to say, this is stealth bird content this week.
Yeah.
We have exactly the right guest for this show. And this specific episode, it's not Bird Week, although you might have thought that. No, this episode, we're talking about the Playdate, the weird little square yellow console from Panic, of all people. And I'm really excited to talk about this. Shane isn't on the episode because he's the only loser who didn't get a Playdate.
And it's his fault.
Our sympathies.
It's a judgment on his character and personality that his has been shipped a lot slower than the rest of ours.
It's a judgment on his impulse buying, where he waited just a little longer than the rest of us who could buy almost immediately because it was cute and yellow.
Yeah, I almost never buy things like this. This is the only novelty device that I think I own and have ever really owned.
Whereas I'm sitting here at my desk with, I think if I count literally 7 handheld game consoles,
Reagan is surrounded.
So I am your reverse twin, Nate Heininger.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. I did order. I am still impatiently, frankly, waiting for my Steam Deck. I'm about to burn down Reagan's house and steal his. But yeah, anyway, this is the first one I've bought, I think, ever, and I'm excited to talk about it today.
Yeah, me too. So I thought before we really dive in, we're mostly going to be talking about just the experience of some of the games that we've played on Playdate. We've now, each of us has had the Playdate for at least a few weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, I think. And so we've had the chance to try a bunch of different games. And so we're mostly going to be talking about those. But before we dive into talking about the games, you could, depending on what corner of the gaming web you inhabit, it's entirely possible that you're not all that familiar with the Playdate or where it comes from. So I thought we could start by talking a little bit about what is this weird little yellow thing that we're all fidgeting with, and then kind of go from there. Mark, I know you have a bit of backstory with Panic, maybe more than any of the rest of us. So maybe could you tell us the story of the Playdate a little bit?
Yeah, so Panic, for most of the company's history, it started in the mid-90s. They are a Mac software company. They have made Audion, which was a early MP3 player for the Mac that almost became iTunes. You can listen to a story I did about that on Welcome to Macintosh.
That's very good.
Extremely good episode.
Excellent plug.
Macintosh. Really
well
good
done.
And
that's a professional right there, everybody.
Yeah, it was. Specifically relevant to me because I was a big Audion user back in the 90s. It was my first MP3 playing software, and I got very into the themes and all of that. And I'm sure we'll get into it, but gosh, the Playdate feels and looks a little bit like an Audion theme to me.
It's something where the the faces to Audion, as they were called. Then the like that spirit it has been one of the few like through lines for Panic, I think. They make also a file transfer protocol app called Transmit.
If you are listening to this podcast, it went through Transmit. I use that every time I upload the show to S3. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's great. I use it regularly for work. It is a fantastic app. And then they make now an app called Nova, which is a fantastic code editor. But they have also, in more recent history, started getting into games with first as a publisher for Firewatch. Is it right? Am I right that they were a publisher?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. They've only a publisher, right? I don't think they've ever developed their own games apart from maybe if you count things on the Playdate.
Yeah. I think, I'm trying to remember because if it was producer and publisher, what exactly? I'm now second guessing myself on all.
Pretty sure publisher is correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. They were a publisher on Firewatch and then again with Untitled Goose Game, which both of those were fantastic. And I think they've been increasingly just excited about doing video game stuff just because that's what the people who work there are interested in addition to the seemingly unrelated file transfer app and code editor.
You got to pay the bill somehow. Although I guess they might have made more off of Firewatch and Goose Game.
Or to be honest, if they're like most devs I know, they get incredibly angry that X doesn't exist, make one internally, and then decide that they should sell that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's not enough Goose Games in the market.
There is a severe lack of waterfowl.
Honestly, I think like Goose Game was such a massive success for them. Like I'm not sure timing wise. Do you know if the success of Goose Game, it would have happened after they began this project, right? Because I know that the Playdate was in progress for a really long time.
Yeah. So for context, that story that I did about Panic, I went and visited their offices in Portland, which are really pretty. And that was in December 2016. The room that they picked out for doing the interviews in, after I arrived and we sat down, they realized that all over the walls and sitting around were like details about the games for the Playdate and prototype hardware that they had just forgotten to clean up. And rather than having me sign an NDA or do anything around that, they were just like, "You won't tell anyone, right? Do you want to see a demo of what this is?" And then in December 2016, they were saying like, "Oh man, this project is really dragged on, but we're finally going to get it out this coming year." So,
cute.
That was.
Then someone had that Goose Game idea, and they diverted all resources from Playdate.
They found House. They were like,
yeah.
But yeah, it's something where I think that had been going on. It was initially an idea for a thing that would be like a 15th or 20th anniversary of Panic, like kind of gag gift sort of thing, just like to commemorate this. And it just continued to kind of have scope creep until it was suddenly like, this is a project that we've put a lot of resources into.
Scope creep in this industry?
Yeah, exactly. But it ultimately then has become a real thing that has seemingly been quite popular. They're back ordered until 2023, so and people seem to overall be liking it. It's just weird to see this company known for utility Mac apps then be making this just bizarre little handheld game system, but I love it.
Turns out if you make it cute and yellow, people will throw money at it.
Don't discount the power of a crank.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good
The
gimmick.
crank is very delightful.
It's a good gimmick. Do you know when they partnered with Teenage Engineering for the...
They had partnered with Teenage Engineering by the time I saw the prototype. I think it was relatively recent at that point. But But yeah,
they have a really good podcast, by the way, where they have a Panic podcast, and they also have a Playdate podcast now that they have a very in-depth episode sort of telling the story of the development of the Playdate with lots of, interviews and so on. And it's very charming. It's a really great listen. So if folks want a really in-depth, history of the Playdate, go check that out. It's a really, really nice one. But it is really weird to see from the outside, like, for folks who aren't familiar with Panic as a developer, like you hear something like, developer of utility apps, and you have this impression of like what that means. But like Panic has always been this sort of weirdo company in the Mac software scene. As a Mac nerd in the 90s, you didn't know the name of the person who made most of the utility apps on your Mac, especially if they were like, corporate-y, right? But like you knew who Panic was, and you probably even knew who Cable Sasser was. Like Cable Sasser has always been this sort of like very vibrant personality in the sort of Mac software scene, and later, iOS and just sort of that nerd area of the world. And that personality has always sort of come through in the software. Like there's little touches, even just simple stuff like the icons are just sort of very playful. And they always have been, even going back to the 90s. We're talking about like, chunky old Mac software that just like looked cute in ways that other Mac software didn't at the time. So I don't know. I love sort of following that story through. And when they started getting into video games, a lot of folks were pretty surprised, but I was a little bit less so, because it's always sort of been like on the periphery of their company. Something I really remember is that back in I don't know when this would have been, but whenever Katamari Damacy came out for the PlayStation 2, I was wild about that game. I went out and got it the first day that it came out, and then I started looking around for merch for Katamari Damacy. Even went so far as one of my friends had a screen printing thing and was like making Katamari Damacy shirts herself. But like I found out that there was official merch for Katamari Damacy, and it was sold through Panic's web store. Like they were the only place in the United States where you could order a Katamari Damacy shirt in like 2010 or whenever this would have been. I don't even know. Just because like, I guess Cable was like a huge fan and talked to Keita Takahashi about it, and
sure, why not?
Worked out to sell merch for him in the US, which is super weird.
And then later on,
right?
Like, hi, I sold your merch. Make me a game for my weird little yellow hardware. And it all worked out.
I love that weird through line of it. It's so amazing. So I'm just so happy that this finally came out. I thought that I was like a little worried, having heard a little bit about this every now and then since probably around, when Mark was seeing the clandestine demo.
Well, if you remember, after Mark's, clandestine demo, he did come out and just started telling everyone about it as much as he could.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I remember.
They call him the Playdate leaker.
Yeah, I remember the controversy.
Oh man.
But they've been demoing the thing in person at places like PAX for years, and it's been delayed. And, part of it was obviously due to the pandemic, but they've had other significant delays. They had an issue with the batteries that they had to do a whole extra almost year of work, kind of just refitting them with different hardware. So
brand new
it's
chips.
Been a troubled project. Yeah.
They were impacted. They were getting ready to ship, and then the chip shortage made them basically bring them all back and actually have to replace the whole chipset and rewrite a bunch of the code for the new chipset. I mean, they've just been hit by every possible delay. But we're here now.
Yes, we are. And if you are, just hearing about this today, or, you're just thinking about buying a Playdate, I would go ahead and do a pre-order. They're back ordered pretty far. At this point, you're probably going to be getting it early in next year. If you change your mind, you can go cancel it. But at this point, I'd say, go ahead and hop on that train. I love mine. I think it's great. We'll get into all the specifics in a bit. But like, Shane, come on. What'd you do? You waited too long. You got to get in there fast with these sorts of projects.
Yeah, I think we were all in this first several thousand orders right? Like I think Mark,
I think you were way earlier than any of us.
I was order number 1000.
Amazing.
Evidently, that was a notification that Panic got, and they tweeted at me about that.
Did they know? Did they were like, oh, that's that guy who revealed all our secrets 5 years ago, 7 years ago, whatever.
It's been a long time.
Yes.
So before we get into talking about the games, I think maybe we should start by talking about the hardware. We don't need to be like the gadget blogger, unboxing video type thing, but like there's so much to this that's out of the ordinary for a game device that we need to talk about just sort of what it is like to hold and what are all the bits on it a little bit. Mark, what was your first impression of the hardware?
I mean, I think the for one, just how incredibly small it is. Like, it is impossibly thin and tiny. It is.
Even
I've been telling my coworkers, it is like, picture a yellow Post-it notepad.
Yeah.
And then take about 50 Post-its, maybe 30, and that's it. That is the size and shape and weight.
It's a Kraft American single Game Boy is basically what it is.
But it's smaller than a Kraft American single. Like,
I think it is,
you could wrap this in a piece of cheddar, and it would be contained.
It's smaller
and it would be
than
delicious.
Even though they gave you the dimensions, you knew what you're buying. It was smaller than I expected. It's very small.
It is. Part of it was a pleasant surprise for me. When I bought the thing, I kind of expected this to be sort of a desk toy, and that is a big part of it. Like, it's a cute little game thing. Here I am talking to you from a desk with a bunch of handheld video game consoles sitting on it in various different states. So I was thinking like, this will be a fun thing for me to sit at my desk. I'll probably mostly play it there. Actually, I've ended up carrying it around a ton, and it's partly because it's exactly the right size if you're a dude and wearing a shirt with a front pocket, which I wear a lot of that kind of shirt. It fits so perfectly into a shirt pocket that it feels like that must have been a design consideration or plan. Like, it fits so perfectly in there to the point where it's like it's not so big that it makes you feel like you have a weird bulge on your shirt. You kind of forget it's there, but it's easy to pull out. It's perfectly sized, and it's I wouldn't probably put this in like a back pocket or something. It's not quite tough enough to sit on, but it feels like really nice in your hands, and it's so portable. It's just really easy to just slip into wherever you can put Post-it notes are a perfect approximation, though. Yeah,
it was actually the hardware, the appeal of the hardware is what ultimately made me decide to purchase one, because, like I said, I don't normally buy things like this, but their partnership with Teenage Engineering is what kind of sold it for me. They make synthesizers and little fun music creation gizmos. I've talked about them on the show in the past, and they always look really good, feel really good, are fun to play, and thought Panic has the reputation that they have for software and just that sort of ease of use and fun quality, and then Teenage Engineering creates really good hardware that also sounds really good and has little tiny LED screens all over them. So I thought this is a really interesting and a really cool partnership, and that's what sold it for me, was that promise of interesting hardware. And so far the promises made, promises kept. It has felt good, and the crank, it's a good crank.
Yeah, we didn't talk about the crank yet, which is the most obvious physical property of the hardware. They really sell it on the crank. Not every game uses the crank, although most do to some degree. But the crank is it's right there. It sticks out. It has a cute little docking thing where it kind of folds out from the side of the console, but it still feels really sturdy, to me at least. And it just kind of, overall the controls are very Game Boy like. You've got a D-pad and an A and B button, and then a menu button. No start and select, but the crank gives you analog input, and different games use it in so many different ways. We'll talk about it as we go through some of the games, but it's really clever. It's the most unique control on the thing. This is the only game console that has a crank, unless you're thinking fishing controllers on the Dreamcast or whatever. Which honestly,
yes,
that was good too. But like very unique little thing, and it's easy to sell it on that. Like you could say like, this is a weird little handheld game console that has a crank, and your mind immediately goes to like, what do you do with a crank in a video game? And you start thinking about, well, maybe it could do this or that. And then maybe they give you some demos of games using the crank, and it's all very clever and interesting. And I think the same, like it appeals to developers who are like, wow, a neat piece of hardware. I would love to try to build something for that. And it appeals to the people looking at, this is just sort of a cute little game toy to stick in their shirt pocket or on their desk, because what else do you have that has a crank? You're not going to compare this against your Game Boy or your 3DS or whatever, because this is the only one of those that has a crank.
So Mark has been on for a few of our Apple Design Awards, which often are Apple rewarding a thing that they feel is specific to an iPhone award, although they've drifted. And I feel like the crank, the small size, there's a lot of things that make the Playdate feel unique and special. I love that it's like off-center screen. The screen isn't wide. It's got a personality. Honestly, for me, it was the combination of a little device that, like, at the worst, I've bought a cute object. Like, if all the games are terrible, I will not hate looking at this. As opposed to, let's be honest, there are a lot of game consoles that are just ugly.
Mm-hmm.
And they are big bricks. Most are ugly. Yeah. Many are big bricks. Many are like trying to be super uber gamer, and they put like, chrome and neon lights on it. It does not fit the rest of my lifestyle. I appreciate great pedigree. The season had wonderful developers I was excited about. I figured the crank was going to be inspiring. And if you say, we're going to give you some small snack size games, and you're going to get 2 a week in a manageable time slot, and it's going to be in a very nice little package that I trust is made by someone who's good. I'm like, yeah, all those things took the risk way down for me. I'm not a console buyer, and I'm not an early adopter, but I wanted to play the games with other people. I didn't want to wait a year and play the games. So those are all things that really sold me on it. And I think the only complaint is that they have a fantastic, I picked the word clock, which is incredibly charming. And I just want it to be a display, and there is no kickstand, and there's no way to balance this thing on a desk. So I had to buy a business card holder off Amazon that is very sharp. But
that looks cute, though. That looks like it would work for the...
It costs $3, and we can link it in the show notes. It is excellent. It fits right here, and I have a desk clock.
Perfect.
Gonna get rich off that affiliate money.
Off that affiliate money.
When you're buying your $3 business card holder, please enter our promo code.
0.0004 cents. We don't have an but
no.
Except I can't read it right now because it's nighttime and the screen doesn't work in the dark, which is my other only complaint.
Same.
Yeah, that's definitely something to talk about. So the screen is the other, I think, really unique part of this. One of the things I heard somewhere, maybe it was in the Panic podcast, I'm not sure, was that one of the very first things they decided on for this was the screen, because at some point, Cable saw the Sharp Memory LCDs, which is what this uses, and it is a really unique looking LCD. It's not a kind of display that I've seen on any other stuff. I think the only other time I might have seen this kind of display is on things like payment. I've seen some like payment kiosk type things that use displays like this. But it's very unique and actually a really interesting display for this kind of device. So the Memory LCD is a very high resolution black and white, only black and white, no grayscale display that is highly reflective, but is not backlit. Sharp has a website about this where they tout like what it's good for, but like there's a couple of big things about it. The main one is that it kind of has the look of e-ink. So if you've used something like a Kindle, it looks quite a bit like the e-ink display of a Kindle. It's a little bit, it's more about like a reflective. It's not quite the same as e-ink, but it has something of that character to it.
Yeah, it's got like an e-ink feel, but like if you're on like a really nice high resolution MacBook, it kind of feels like a blend of the two.
Really sharp
e-ink.
Very sharp.
Exactly, yeah. And the like high reflectivity of it like gives it that sort of like high contrast look. You do still, obviously it doesn't work in the dark. But I think some of the reviews that have been talking about like how they, it should have been backlit or they wish it was backlit, or a little bit overstating it. Like, as long as you're not in a completely dark room, I haven't had much trouble.
Well, I mean, I'll say, for me, who I have a myriad of eye problems, I basically have to have it like directly lit in order to really see it. Like, I was sitting on the couch, like, this is not enough light. Like, it's nice at my desk where I have this like really nice LED light that I can, put it directly on it. But otherwise I found it difficult to play outside of being directly lit. I'm obviously unique in that, situation, but still I was like, this is a backlight would be really nice.
And the only reason this bothers me at all is because I pictured this as a really good waiting for friends at the bar game. And I think it's going to be waiting for friends at the park game. And that's fine. It just
you'd be
changes
knocking over
the circumstances.
Drinks. You're cranking so hard. You start wilding out and you're knocking over drinks, and that's probably
think about it. Like, how charming, like if you're sitting at like a bar playing a little Playdate by yourself, you look much more fun than like looking at your phone, right? So it sounds like a silly thing, but
someone walks out, they're like, looks like you're looking for a play date, and you're like, get the hell away from me.
This might have been like when I read Lord of the Rings on the bleachers in high school, and like all the nerd boys came.
Oh no. I haven't had that experience, but I can see that. So yeah, physically, hardware wise, like I'm really in love with the thing. I really find it fun to hold, fun to use, fun to play. There's a few little things about it that I would improve. I think its D-pad is fine, but not great.
But barely used.
Well, yeah, my favorite game on it, which we'll talk about, is D-pad heavy. But it's a fine D-pad, but then again, it's not the worst D-pad I've ever used, and it's it's fit to purpose. I don't know. Maybe you guys can tell me if this is a thing that you guys even notice, or maybe it's only my particular unit. But like, the B button is fine and feels perfectly normal, but on my unit, the A button, when I depress it, it depresses at an angle.
Mine is fine.
Happens to yours?
Okay,
maybe it's just mine. So like, I think you've got some fit and finish. Okay, damn it, I'm not going to send the thing back over it. It never was going to like. It does. It's like the button works perfectly fine, but like when I press it, it just feels a little angled. I don't know. I'm just picky. So like, they have a little bit of fit and finish issues. I know that some people have received units with one issue or another, and they've been replacing them. So like, it hasn't bothered me enough to make an issue out of it, but like, little stuff like that, first round, brand new hardware, it's understandable, I think.
Yeah. The only other positive I would throw out is that the sound is good.
Oh, yeah.
Which really I would hope from their partnership with Teenage Engineering, who make little synthesizers. They're called pocket operators. I've done no research, but I imagine that there's some overlap in this technology. They are known for making very small, good sounding beat machines and synthesizers and things like that, and this sounds really good for there's not a lot of space going on inside this thing, and so for what they were able to cram into it, I think it sounds really nice.
They put a decent speaker in it. It's not like gonna knock your socks off, but it sounds good. And the sound that this thing makes, like, I know they have they have both the ability to play back like just pre-recorded samples, and I think there is some kind. I don't think it has an actual sound chip, but there is some kind of like system level like synthesizer angle on this as well, and that sounds really good. That actually kind of also leads me to one other thing I wanted to note while we're still talking about sort of the origins and the hardware and everything of this, and that's that the thing that really attracted me to the Playdate is that I've always been really, really interested in, at least for the last many years, in fantasy consoles. I think we've talked about this in the context of Pico 8 before. So like, there's a number of these out there, but Pico 8 is probably the most well known. So Pico 8 kind of explains what a fantasy console is. They describe it as a fantasy console is like a regular console, but without the inconvenience of actual hardware. Pico 8 has everything else that makes a console: machine specifications, a display format, development tools, design culture, distribution platform, community, and playership. It's similar to, so they go on to describe a little bit about what Pico 8 is, but if you're not familiar, Pico 8 is basically like it's almost as if it was like an emulator for a console that never existed. It's a piece of software, you download it, you run it on your computer or other device, but it plays Pico 8 games, which have a specific set of things that a Pico 8 game is. You write them in Lua, and they have like a 128 by 128 resolution, etc.
It's where Celeste started.
Yeah, Celeste started as a Pico 8 game. It's a really neat like prototyping tool for game devs, and it's also just like a neat set of constraints. So developers like to screw around in Pico 8 because it gives them, it's kind of like the 4-track recorder of game development. It's like a small simple thing with like tight constraints that lets you do something small and interesting and creative and relatively quickly. And when I heard about the Playdate, it kind of felt like an extension of that idea. It's this device that, in the modern era, no one was looking to, to make a black and white handheld gaming console with 2 buttons and a crank. But that is a like specific set of design constraints that Panic chose for this. They could have put a beefier CPU in it. They could have chosen a different LCD. They could have done all sorts of other stuff. But like, this is an interestingly specifically chosen set of design constraints, and then they also created nice development tools for developers, and it creates this weird inviting environment for developers to create something weird and interesting. And so this feels really like an outgrowth of the like fantasy console thing, but kind of like a reverse fantasy console, because when does a fantasy console stop being a fantasy console? It's when it's a console. It's just a console. It's just a console. But like I really like that this has that sort of lineage, or it feels like it does to me. And we can talk, I guess, a little bit about the development tools, but like it feels like they were looking specifically at that scene. For example, they've got the Pulp development tool for this, where you can create games easily, and it's based on Bitsy, which is another fantasy console kind of similar to Pico 8. And then their main development tool, you can write games in C, but you can also write them in Lua, which is a popular scripting language. It's also the language that was used by Pico 8 and other fantasy consoles as well as everywhere throughout the gaming industry. It's a very common scripting language, but still it has this sort of through line there. So I don't know. I was very excited to see something that took that and ran with it in a hardware first direction. Really neat.
I think the subscription element, which is kind of bundled all into that, is really unique and a huge value add to this whole thing.
That was a huge selling point for me. At the time, I was working at a subscription gaming company, so I was like, bundle it with hardware. Maybe this is the secret. For me, it is very fun to say you get 2 games a week, and then next week you get 2 more. And that no matter when you buy it, you're going to be on this.
Yeah, we should say the subscription is probably not even the right word, because unless you get the subscription with the purchase of
they just call it the season model. They don't call it a subscription, although maybe it will be for season 2 or whatever.
Yeah.
It doesn't work so well when you're on a podcast and everyone gets the devices at a different time. Mm-hmm. However, given that I am on week 4, I think Mark's on week 5. Like, we're all at different stages.
We're on the same 3. I think we're on the same, Laura.
Oh, okay. I got it on a Saturday, so I got the first week started, or the second week started 2 days after receiving it, which is a little ridiculous. But anyway, the nice thing is, it is kind of like watching a TV show and being really into it. And like 4 weeks later, your friends watch it and you're like, yes, we can now talk about it. Like, that's kind of what this feels like, is that I'm playing a game. I'm really excited to say, like, I am from the future and I like this one. Like, that's a conversation I like having. There's often such an addiction to like a new game that a game that came out 6 months ago, people have a hard time talking about it because it's, quote, no longer relevant. And I know our podcast tries to dissuade people from this, but like, this feels like the game is always going to be relevant because people are going to be receiving this up until 2024. So
I know,
we'll still be talking about week 1 games then.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I do feel like we'll probably want to loop back and do another Playdate episode once we've seen the entire season. Mm-hmm. 24 games is like, if they had decided to just sort of drop 24 games on you, I think it would have been, I would have had the same problem with it that I often have when I pick up something like, my Game Boy that has a flash cart in it. It has every single game imaginable. And that is that, like, I only ever play the same 3, and staring at a list of 50 games, I don't pick one. I put it down again. Whereas like this, where they're sort of releasing games to you weekly, on Monday, my Playdate lights up with a little LED and a little badge on the screen telling me there's new games to play. And I'm like, oh.
And you open little
purple beacon.
Little presents. You open little presents, too.
Yeah, it has this beautiful little animation where a robot unwraps your gift, which is each new game.
It's adorable.
And the sound is perfect. I mean, the personality, the lock animation is our eyeballs waking up, like when you wake it from sleep. There's a lot of little things like that.
Yeah, you have to press it twice, one for each eyeball.
Oh, yeah.
I love
like
that.
You do.
It's so cute.
Yeah.
But how many consoles have a personality?
I think they all try. I think they all think they're like, I'm a cool space bot that welcome to my.
The Wii did.
I think the
Wii
Wii
had a
did.
personality.
I was going to say nothing's really been there for me since the Play It Loud era of the Game Boy, when you get the like bright green or yellow or orange Game Boy. But yeah, you're right. The Wii had some personality to it.
I think
Nintendo's always been a torch carrier for that. Like, if you had a 3DS when you downloaded a game on there, it had an almost sort of similar thing where like the game would show up as a little wrapped package on your home screen, and then you'd tap it to unwrap the thing. So like there's that whimsy on the Nintendo side. This feels like it's learned a lot of lessons from like, you remember how Nintendo used to be fun?
Yeah. Well, I think PlayStation wants you to feel like, oh, I'm in a cool spaceport and here's all my space objects. And it's like, no, it's just kind of an obnoxious UI. But I think they have personality, but not like this, where it's fun and cute.
I'll also give a shout out to, it would have been very easy for them to do a season of games and like lock it down, but it's very easy to add third-party games, which we'll talk about. But like it's a both. You get the season stuff for free, and you can add easily.
Yeah.
It was an incredibly easy experience to sideload. So I just want to get they didn't have to do that.
Yeah,
and I'm really glad they did.
They're also working on like I forget what they're calling it, like the I'm blanking on the word.
They call it catalog.
Yeah.
Marketplace.
Working on a catalog app to, not as an app store, but as a directory of here's how you can find good games. And I think that will really improve kind of that day one experience. I think the one critique I have of the season model is that when you first are able to start up your device, you have 2 games. And I think that while they picked good games for it, that I think that it should be, they should have had more at the start, just to, I think that would make it a more fun experience.
Like week 1 is 6 games, and then every other week
Even
is 2 games.
Even 4.
Yeah, I think 4 games.
Yeah, I think a lot of people bounced off of like, we'll talk about the games, but like the first week was Whitewater Wipeout and Casual Birder. And like I ended up quite enjoying Whitewater Wipeout and not being as into Casual Birder. I know other folks were the opposite, but certainly there's going to be folks out there for whom neither of those games is their thing. And then you're going to be waiting a week for something new.
Exactly.
And that's not all that fun. The out of the box experience on something like, a brand new PlayStation or whatever, like, you're hopping on the store to pick something yourself. Whereas this, it's like, you get what you get, which is not bad. I still like that model, but yeah, that first week, maybe it gels for you, maybe it doesn't, but it is still just 2 games.
Yeah.
I'm curious, before we get into specific games, what's the overall vibe folks are getting from playing games on this? Like, how are you enjoying gaming on the Playdate?
I've been really enjoying it, and I think both in season 1 and in the games that are currently available for sideloading, there's a pretty good variety of games that are really good for, you pick up the Playdate for 30 seconds, a couple minutes, and just play a little bit, as well as some that are longer narratives, and I might play for like an hour or so. And that at both ends, I've been really enjoying it. I think the thing that has been a common theme among especially the season of games is there is almost a complete lack of instructions on how to play most of the games.
Bafflingly 0.
Yeah. And it's the Whitewater Wipeout that Reagan mentioned, like, it feels utterly impenetrable at first, and everyone that I've handed the Playdate to try it, because if I've brought it somewhere, someone's been like, that looks so cool, and they want to play with it, and then they try that and they've all felt really dumb and just like, I guess I'm bad at games.
But at least it says get crankin'. When in doubt, I've tried to use the crank, but but honestly, until I looked it up for this podcast, I did not know the D-pad was involved in that game.
Oh, really? And I didn't realize that.
Hints, like when you die at the end of the game, like it gives you a little hint of like a thing you can do or shouldn't do, but there's no way to see.
You might play it dozens of times before seeing that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And there's no way to even see the ones that they have shown you if like they wanted it to be, you get this information slowly. Like I think just like give people even just an optional screen of like tips or something. Like
the game where you're going back and forth in time with the crank, I only spent a couple minutes, but I was like, I truly have no idea what's going on in this game. That's
one of my favorites. Crankin's Time Travel Adventure. That's Keita Takahashi's game. It's amazing. But yeah, no, I know what you mean.
Once you know what you're doing.
Once you know what you're doing, yeah. I that's been my experience with it, is that I've really enjoyed the games I've taken the time to dig into. And then I've had a couple bounce off moments with some of the games too, where I'm like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. And whatever, I'll pick up something else because I don't care that much to dig into all of them.
I have been, it wasn't exactly a surprise for me, but like in playing games on the Playdate, I'm mostly gravitated towards the very short session, more arcade style type of games, things like puzzle games or things like the Wipeout game, Whitewater Wipeout, or things where like, it is a short defined play session. There are a number of games on the Playdate that have more of a like story, like a longer story, and those also work fine for me if they're like the story is connective tissue between little short experiences, like like a story mode in a puzzle game, that kind of thing. That works really well for me. We'll see how this goes down the road, because there are a lot more games coming this season and a lot more variety, but for me, the Playdate is like a really fun little thing to get out for a second and play like a little round of something, rather than something where I'm going to be playing like lengthy story experiences. It's interesting from that perspective. I'm kind of interested to see more things like visual novels on here, because it is just such a unique screen and like a unique experience of like reading on the thing. Like I've we'll talk about some of them in a minute, but I've played some things or tried some things that are trying to do things like just present motion comics on the Playdate screen. That's interesting. It's not a bad device for that stuff, but it's immediately magnetic for me as just sort of like a high score, fidget thing.
And I keep saying this, like, it is yellow. It is something I don't mind having out. I have it on a stand to use as a clock, so it is much more likely for me to pick up and play for a minute or two than a long session. That's also just because I'm quite frequently moving and I don't have time to do, other than games for the show, I don't have that, time to sit and think that much. So I'm really enjoying it as, like, it is rare for a console to be both a good toy and a good long-term gaming thing. Yeah. And I think I'm enjoying that I can play as long as I want, and I'm happy with it for 2 minutes, and I'm happy with it for 30 or an hour. And that's usually not the case. Mm-hmm. Not since like iPhone has that been the case.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So we are all at slightly different points, but when it comes to the season 1 Playdate games, we have a number that we've all played. I think Laura has a few that I won't have seen, but I thought we could go through those in the order in which they've come out. If you are avoiding spoilers, I've seen a lot of people get up in arms about spoilers for the Playdate, or like spoilers about upcoming games. And, fair enough. Like, if you want to be surprised by the games, that is kind of part of the experience. Then maybe don't listen to these. I can just sort of give you a general, hey, they're fun. And you maybe come back and listen to this portion later. We're going to start by talking about the games in season 1 that we've gotten a chance to check out. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about some of those games that are we're still very early days, but a number of developers have created games for the Playdate using the free tools that Panic has made available and published them online on their own websites, or mostly on itch.io, where you can download them either for free or for a handful, for a couple of bucks, and then load them onto your Playdate yourself. So we're going to talk about some of those games that we've checked out from the side loading side of things as well. So talking about season 1, we already mentioned it, but the first game that you get on your Playdate is Whitewater Wipeout by Chuhai Labs. What I had a weird first experience with this one. I think a lot of people did, but what were your impressions of Whitewater Wipeout?
My initial feeling was just really frustrated with it, just because I couldn't figure out what to do. And like the first few times I played it, I think my high score was like 8 or something.
Well, it's emphasis on the wipeout. Again, this is the first game I played, and it just says get crankin', and then you almost immediately just die.
And it's like gnarly, or like you suck, or
it's really mean.
It's really
Loser.
mean. Yeah. Bad job.
I had a very similar experience, but I was slightly prepared for this because I had heard that this was based on the surfing game from California Games, which is a popular game that from the like late 90s, or maybe early, I'm not even sure. Sometime in the 90s, it was on the Atari Lynx, but I never had a Lynx, but it was also on everything. There was a port for the NES and everything.
I think I had that game, Reagan, and that I remember as I was playing this, I was like, I could not put my finger on it, but I remember playing a surfing game early on the Nintendo that was horrible. It was incredibly
Obviously, you just didn't know how to play it. Same experience with Whitewater Wipeout.
Yeah, and I was like,
but like this is basically that, but with the crank as a control instead of a D-pad. And I think it's a nice port, sort of that kind of idea. It reminded me a lot of like the very first time that I played. Listeners of this show will remember like how much I love Alto's Adventure and Alto's Odyssey. And the very first time I played those games, I was like, this is crap. I don't get it. I'm doing something wrong. I feel like I'm landing these jumps correctly, but I'm falling on my face. Nothing's working. This sucks. But for some reason I kept going back to it, and eventually I like 100%ed both of those games and was like completely obsessed with them for years and still boot them up from time to time. And I had I'm not going to say I'm going to be playing Whitewater Wipeout in 8 years, but I have had a similar early arc with this because like once you figure out what it's actually asking you to do, it's really fun. It's like a very physical thing, and the crank is brilliant for it. I think maybe the reason that they chose this as one of the first 2 games is that it feels like a really natural use of the crank, because it's not like just like turning the crank to activate something or do something. Like it's literally using the position of your crank, and the position of your crank mirrors the angle that your surfboard is at. So if you want to do a spin, you are spinning the crank exactly 360 degrees. If you want to angle the crank, the surfboard a little to the right, you twist the crank by about that many degrees, and you get a very one-to-one response between the position of the crank and the position of the surfboard. It feels great, and once you get your head around it, it's really fun to try for high scores in this thing.
Yeah, once you get that, like, it's actually pretty delicate and incredibly responsive. I think that's the thing, is you don't know how responsive the Playdate is if this is your first game, and so you like, it's kind of like when I learned how to drive on like an old Suburban. Like I thought that every car needed like 3 rotations of the wheel before the right turn, and then I got in a normal car and I was like, okay, and it was like
doing donuts,
and it was like, what is this car doing? It's responding to me way too much. And that's how I acted when I got the Playdate. Like the Wipeout, I like immediately cranked and just basically turned the surfboard over, and I was trying to go in a straight line.
You immediately flop,
and I immediately flop, and the game isn't like, you don't know how to use a crank yet, because there's not a lot of instructions. And once you figure that out, you realize it's a very sensitive input mechanism. I hope people try it and like have patience, because even though we're saying this, you will still pick that up and fail because you are not used to using the hardware. Like I can tell you this, you can read it a million times. It will happen to you regardless of how smart you are. You've got to kind of get a feel for the tool, and it's a new input device you have to learn. It's more relevant tech example is like, think about the people who used iPhones like they did like the consoles you do at museums where you have to like press really hard. Like you use it like an ATM screen, and people were like pounding the iPhones back in the day.
As someone who sold iPhones in stores in the first few years, I can absolutely corroborate that.
And this is the same thing with the crank.
Just could not use a touch screen.
You're afraid that like you're gonna rotate it off or like that it needs a lot of pressure. Like you're going to do this wrong the first time. So I'm really glad this is one of the first games. I wish it was just kind of like a little less mean while you were learning about it.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Well, I like that. I think it's funny. It's very, it's surf rock.
I think it's that. But I could see people bouncing off of it, though.
Yeah.
Should we all share our high scores?
Oh, it's like 80. I didn't play that much very long.
I don't know.
All right.
Yeah,
I'm
Reagan.
pull mine up.
This is Reagan just wants to
This
share.
is just Reagan bragging.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Did you beat my score, Reagan?
I don't think so.
I was looking for an apartment. I did not play
I was gonna let you annihilate me live on air, but here, I'll tell you what it is. Hang on. How do I get to the high score screen here? There it is. My high score is 150,642.
Jesus
which
Christ.
I'm still pretty proud of.
Yeah, see?
But that was, 3 good runs back to back that I was quite proud of. But I know Mark has annihilated me.
Mine is 398,794.
What? No, you went even higher? I thought you were 200. No, Mark, no.
Yeah.
I mean, that's gotta be, you've gotta be, considering the market of this game, like, you've gotta be in the leaderboards, like top 10.
No,
there's an online leaderboard for this. So far, I think it's the only game I've seen that uses an online leaderboard.
And it's in the millions.
There's some people out there doing, I assume, hacks, cheating.
Like a little robot that just knows how to do 900s.
Yeah. Something wild.
Tony Hawk's out there.
So the other game in week 1 was Casual Birder. And this was the game I was actually most excited about for the first few weeks. I didn't end up actually enjoying it that much, but I know like it's cute. But I think maybe other folks have had a better experience with it than I did. I just ended up spending so much time with Whitewater Wipeout that I didn't end up putting enough time into Casual Birder. But did anybody get take a lot of bird photos?
No, but I will say I was immediately surprised that someone was like, that even effort was being made into making like little RPG story experiences in a game or on Playdate, which will continue to happen apparently. I was fully expecting this to be 100% like Whitewater Wipeout and things like that, just 100% of the time. And so having these little story games is nice. Casual Birder itself, I did not really spend much time with.
Well, Mark, I think you spent a little more time with it. Can you tell us about Casual Birder?
Yeah, I feel like as the bird correspondent here, it was my civic duty,
your responsibility. Thank you, Mark.
I thought that the like tone and the like story and writing for it was spot on. It's just really funny writing. I really liked the art style for it. It feels very akin to like an early Pokemon game. And the birds that you were taking photos of, I was incredibly charmed by their names. Where I can recognize what bird that this is modeled on, but has a mangled name. Like, I think my favorite was, instead of a great blue heron, it's a sweet blue Herman, which is just one of the best things I've ever heard.
The bonker-bellied tree tapper, which I think is just a woodpecker.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
Where it's just like all the descriptions of the birds, it's just like, I don't know, just the tone of it. It really resonated for me. I'll say that like the mechanic of using the crank to focus the camera on the birds, I thought was fine. It was kind of hard to get the hang of, and it doesn't feel. Having used an SLR camera a lot, it does not feel at all related to what it is like to focus a lens. And so that was just kind of hard. I think it's the case of like having enough information to like be overthinking it. It might be more fun if you're not trying to apply that logic, but
yeah, I was a little surprised that they did the crank to focus when, like, I don't know, I'm old enough to have used manual film advance cameras where there was an actual crank, not that different from the one on the Playdate, and that's right there. And I was expecting it to be more like that. The crank to focus mechanic very quickly became a frustration for me because like there's some early on, there's a bird I was trying to photograph. I'm not sure if maybe I was getting ahead of things or sort of jumping to, you know, something later game or something, because it's pretty open in terms of the world. But I spent a long time trying to get a photo of this bird that was just sort of flying from one tree to another.
Yeah, you need something else later
fast,
in the game.
Sort of randomly. And I was able to eventually get a photo of it, but it was really hard to line up the shot and focus it. And essentially you're trying to capture a bird in flight that's moving around sort of randomly from tree to tree. By the end of that, I was like, man, this is a misguided mechanic. The like crank, and it's like, I get that, like, you know, they wanted to use the crank. I would have preferred that particular bird hold the fuck still, I guess.
Maybe I'm thinking of a different one, but there is at least one that you do need a later game item to photograph.
I might have just, I mean, I did eventually get the photo,
okay.
But I might, you know, maybe there was some bird seed I could have thrown on the ground there and made myself had a lot better time, and I just missed it. That's the other thing about it, was that, like, it was a lot of fun in the early chunk of the game when it's like introducing the story and characters and mechanics to you, and it's very jokey and cute. And then it kind of turns you loose on the open world, and I just didn't really know what to do next. And that was sort of where I fell off of it, where it's like I sort of started wandering around, and you know, I didn't feel like I had a lot of forward momentum at that point. So I think this is a nice, short little photography RPG, which is something we don't get a lot of. Like, you get a little bit of Pokemon, a little bit of Pokemon Snap mixed together here. And I love the way it looks. It's just great looking. And so I could totally see why they put this first. But like, there are other games that came a little later in the season that I think do most of the things I liked about Casual Birder better. So we'll talk about those in a minute. But this was not my favorite. Probably, second least favorite of the 6 games from the season I managed to try so far. But anyway, I still think Casual Birder is worth a try. And hey, bird content. But you know, I'm a little on Casual Birder.
I mean, I played maybe 2 minutes of Casual Birder, but I was in the middle of apartment hunting, and then honestly, my season 1 and season 2, my week 1 and week 2 were 2 days apart, and then the mascot game, basically the one that was the platform seller, and all the ads came out, and I immediately, like, basically that meme of the guy and the girl, like, I basically head turned. It was like Crankin, like moving on to Crankin time travel adventure. So I was like, I also knew that my brethren would cover the bird content, so I was happy to forge ahead to the puzzle game.
Do you want to talk about? We can move on to that one. Do you want to introduce Crankin?
Yeah. So another one that will be completely mystifying when you start. There are no instructions. If they just gave a little bit of instruction, I think this would be. This is an extra special game, and I think it would have been an easy sell had they just been like, this is how the puzzle works, a little up front. But the idea is that you have Crankin, this little robot, kind of looks like is it the Michelin Man with the stacks of tires?
I guess, yeah.
With a little hat that is almost like the little filter on his head. But you're snoozing. You wake up, you realize that you're late for a date, and you quickly turn the crank to go forward, and your girlfriend's pissed. And then you wake up again, and you're going through these dates, and then you notice there's obstacles in your way, and you must go forward and back in time to get around the obstacles to get to these dates that you will always be late for. And every single date, each level is a day in the life of Crankin, and Crankin's inability to wake up or attend a date on time. But basically it's a lot of, like, for example, there's a flower, and whenever you pass a flower, Crankin will bend over and smell the flower, and your first instinct is going to be just to, like, move the crank as fast as possible to just move him fast to get to the date. However, an obstacle comes by at head height. You need to go back in time till you're bent over again for that obstacle to pass over your head. So I say it's a puzzle game. It's a very light puzzle. It's a puzzle game and, like, a physics puzzler. It's not ragdoll, but it's got that
I would call it like puzzle action.
Yeah.
It's mostly about execution once you figure out what you need to do.
Yeah. And then it's just making sure you do it and do all the actions in the right order as quickly as possible. So very linear, very much like I would call this a survival game, but it feels so silly because it's so low stakes. Like the mechanic is like your girlfriend gets pissed and breaks up with you. Like that's the survival.
I love that depending on how fast you're able to complete each level, she has different angry animations. And
Yes.
like if you get there, you're late but not super late, she like I think slaps you, and then if you're a little later than that, she like kicks you in the crotch or something.
Yep. She kicks you
and then
in
if
the
you're
balls.
really late, she suplexes you. It's so funny.
If
I
you're
got
too
suplexed
late,
a
she
lot.
just isn't there. So you have
Yeah.
to.
Oh, really? I didn't know
Yeah.
that. I don't think I've ever been that late.
And the best thing about this game, though, I will say, is the sound design. It's so juvenile and perfect. And that's, I won't say any more than that. But like, do yourself a favor. Like, do not listen to a podcast while playing this game. Like, crank that volume up and hear all the weird noises in beautiful, weird little speaker mode.
It is.
Yeah, this is
really
one to put headphones on for.
Partially just not to drive other people in your household insane.
Yes.
Because you're going to hear the levels a lot because
yes,
it's a little tricky.
yeah. It is. It's such a fascinating game. Personally, I feel like this one, the game design builds in more of the like explanation of how to play it just through those like there will be a level where it introduces a new like the first level. I don't think there's anything. You just crank and you're over to Crankette or whatever her name is.
Yeah.
Then like the next one just introduces a flower, and then the next one, the flower, you actually are now using it. And so the levels build on each other in that way where it's like the frustration of the puzzle and you are given the information somehow of like what can you do and how to solve this. You have all the answers, but it's often very hard to do it properly or to figure out exactly how to put those pieces together. And yeah, the sound design is really just wild. I kind of wish that it had like some original music or something.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's just silent until you hear like the most horrible voices saying things like ew or like squelching sounds or the oinking of why are there so many damn pigs in this game? There's so many pigs.
This is spoilers, but level 9 where you just there's a moment where like I just like fell over laughing and just
yeah, I was gonna say don't spoil. I made a face because Mark was gonna spoil. I was like, no, don't say it. It's such a good joke, and that's why I wanted to call it the sound design. Is essentially that day.
Yeah, I had so much fun with that, and I don't know how far you guys are, but I'm somewhere in like 18 or 19, and by the time you get kind of deep into the game, the dates are very difficult. And so it still has that sort of pick up and play because each quote unquote date is like a pretty short thing if you're able to complete it. But like, it's great to be able to like pull this out, try once or twice, most likely fail, come back to it again. So it is sort of, it's a bigger game. It's not something like Whitewater Wipeout where it is essentially just like resetting every time and, just a pure high score experience. It does have separate levels, but it's really the kind of thing I hope we see more of on Playdate, which is like nice short little sessions, little experiences that is easy to quickly jump into and play, but part of a larger thing. And I think this is just like the ideal Playdate game, honestly. Like Keita Takahashi just like absolutely got it,
Yeah.
Like 100% knows what the Playdate is for, I think, and really nailed it with this one. That's, I think, also, not just the fact that he's such a high profile developer and kind of a good get for this, but like he got it. He's, he understood how to design for this weird device.
And they paired it with, I'm not going to be mad, but like they paired it with one of the like games I had no interest in. So I was like, this is wonderful. Good pairing.
Yeah. I was not at all interested in Boogie Loops either.
I
kind of
not
opened
figure
it up
it
and messed
out.
around.
No, it's just
I really tried to give it a shot.
Me too.
It was just entirely impenetrable. I'm not sure what the game. I don't know that it's a game. I'm not sure
It's a music
It's not.
sequencer.
it's
Yeah,
a music.
so I really wanted to like get into it. There is no manual for this, and this is probably the one thing that could have used a manual more than anything else. I will say for the folks who are, maybe about to get a Playdate, or maybe just, are trying out Boogie Loops, or maybe you bounced off of it. The Playdate community wiki, which is a pretty good website, has an unofficial manual for Boogie Loops, and it's just like a page long and kind of explains what everything is and how it works. Basically what it is it's a 4-track tracker, like a music tracker, which is like a music creation tool where you're laying down notes on tracks and it's looping through them. It's kind of cute. Extra feature is that there's also animated characters like a panda or a cactus or a pizza slice that do dances along with your music. And you can program their dances in a similar kind of way to the way that you program the music in the tracker. So if you're, the kind of person who wants to poke around with a music creation toy, this seems like a pretty interesting or decent one of those. But it's also like kind of like just dropping somebody into like Pro Tools or something with no context.
Yeah, I really wanted, I was like, ooh, a music tracker. This, I think, appeals to me. I enjoy these sorts of things. And I was like, I'm going to make a little track and I'm going to put it on the episode. And then I spent like 10 minutes. I was like, I don't really know what this wants me to do. And I didn't pick it back up. So, I thought this was maybe like Teenage Engineering is their little devices often will have little cute animations at the top as well. And so I thought that was probably, this is a nod to that. But it was kind of incomprehensible to me on how exactly to use it. Like I could tell what's going on. I could tell what it's doing, but going in and like making something different and unique, I could not really wrap my mind around what it wanted me to do. And I put it down. But I like the idea, I think it's fun to have a little, the thing has a nice speaker, pretty good processor. You could make some good stuff with it, but I don't know. Don't make it easier for us to use it, I guess.
Just please give me
Agreed.
a manual.
Yeah. Yeah.
I kind of like that. That's something I tweeted at Panic about this when Boogie Loops first dropped. And I was like, hey, is there documentation for this anywhere? Is there a manual for Boogie Loops or any of the other games? And they were like, that's a great idea. In the meantime, you can check out some playthroughs on YouTube where people will explain it. And I was like, yes, I'm aware YouTube exists. Thank you, Planet Panic. But like, yeah, there is community documentation of this stuff if you go looking for it. So, and I didn't see this unofficial Boogie Loops manual until like sitting down to record this podcast. Now that I'm seeing it here, I may go give this thing another try. It is pretty neat. So I'd like to get better at it, but
I'll have to give it another shot.
Yeah. The third week of, and I'm still on week 3 of the drops here. The third week was my favorite so far. And the 2 games that dropped this Monday for me were Lost Your Marbles and Pick Pack Pup. I want to talk about Pick Pack Pup first because it's my favorite thing on the Playdate by a very long shot so far. I'm not sure if other folks feel the same, but Pick Pack Pup from Nick Magnier, Arthur Hammer, and Logan Gabriel is a match 3 puzzle game, basically. But it's like a really well-designed match 3 puzzle game that takes into account a lot of the things that make the Playdate work. It barely uses the crank. Like it has a sort of frame story where you are a dog working for a dog Amazon equivalent, and your job is to pack boxes. And so the match 3 mechanic is you're matching items to go into boxes and shipping those boxes out. It's just a really decent. It's like a good match 3 puzzle game. It's fairly small in terms of like size of the playfield, so there's like not a huge number of items on screen at any given point, and it has a really, really good story mode. The reason I mentioned the crank thing, in the story mode, you're playing as that dog, and it has these like comic sequences in between like sets of levels where you use the crank to sort of turn pages or scroll through the story comic, which is very cute and funny. You know, you're a long-suffering dog working for Amazon being abused. It's cute and funny, but it doesn't really use the crank at all during gameplay. It's just using the D-pad and buttons. But it's what really stuck out to me about the story mode on this. And I haven't put a lot of time into the other modes, but I'm really glad it has them. The story mode is just a rapid fire of different challenges. So each level of the story mode, it'll give you different little challenges to try. Like, okay, this time we really want you to only pack boxes that have, 5 items in them. Or we want you to only create boxes around the edges of the play field. Or we really want you to match this one specific item. And it's got dozens of levels, each with its own very specific little challenge. There's a ton of variety in the types of items that appear, in the types of challenges. And it's just really, really well done, really well implemented. I've spent way more time with Pack Pup than I have with anything else on the Playdate yet. And I think it's definitely my favorite thing there so far.
I haven't had a chance to dig in on this one yet. I have spent much more time on the other game that came out this week, but I am excited to play Pack Pup. What a fun title to say.
Yeah, it's really delightful.
Yeah.
I enjoyed the story mode for it. I think it is like a nicely done match 3, and I like the satire Amazon dog story. For me, it was less of a standout game, but I think that might just be I am not as much wanting to play a match 3 game. This is probably just more of that. I think it's a really good implementation
like something when I want a little handheld to like quickly take out and just like put a little bit of time into something. Match 3 or other like puzzle games like this are exactly what I was looking for.
A match 3 without the match 3 bullshit of a Candy Crush.
That's true.
Like the back when you paid $2.99 for a match 3, that's about the time I stopped playing them because like all the extra crud sucks. So I am happy for like a match 3 that doesn't have ads in it.
Yeah, but like I'll still like today grab I like literally here within reach. I have my Sega Game Gear with Puyo Puyo 2 like ready to go with batteries charged because I like to just pull something out that plays a nice basic puzzle game like that. And, it's an itch that I frequently need to scratch. And I was so glad to have something that like is actually a good one of those here. And it's not a clone. It's like, it's a full on, it's really well tailored to the Playdate. While still not, it's not like I think I would have, not been too happy if it had like really shoehorned the crank in. It uses it tastefully, I think. It would be really hard to make a crank, like, I don't know what you'd do, like crank to tape the boxes or something. It would have been annoying. But like this is like a really, really well done one of these. It's just unique enough. It's just familiar enough. It's lovely. I just love this one. Somebody tell me more about Lost Your Marbles, because I played maybe the first like 4 or 5 like big areas of this. And I was kind of enjoying it, but I didn't get much farther than that. So who's played some Lost Your Marbles?
Well, I've spent a little bit of time with it. I don't know how far I am into it, but it's one of those games where they have a fun mechanic that I think uses the crank pretty effectively, and then also decided to wrap it in a truly bonkers, goofy story that I really appreciate when someone does this, because the mechanic of this game is, there's been other video games that do this, but I always think of this like an old physical toy that maybe some of you had, where it's like a marble maze where the marble's on the outside and you want it to get maybe into the center, into a hole, or into some sort of divot sort of thing, and you're just moving the toy around, trying to manipulate the marble into sliding into the center hole or whatever it may be. Am I explaining that correctly? Did you all have these as kids?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
They infuriated me. I could not stand those games.
So that's this game, but instead of, a physical thing in front of you, you have the crank where you're actually shifting the world as a ball is moving around. And I think it's a good, smart use of the crank. You've got a sort of like platforming level in front of you, a ball that rolls depending on which way you move the world with the crank, and your goal is to get it to somewhere. They very well could have just made a good, complicated puzzle game built off of this sort of rolling the ball mechanic. But they instead also decide to make this really bizarre and really silly story where your character has, I don't even know how to explain it. You basically,
you're interning.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil too much either, but you're interning with a mad scientist basically who has invented a time machine, but that's in the scrap heap because that wasn't that cool. Has invented a shrink ray, that's now in the tiny scrap heap. For obvious reasons. And their new thing is called the Marbleizer, which is a decision-making tool that you connect to your head, and it will give you the answers to things. And so the very first one you do, you roll the ball and you have to hit they're these little glass ball, bulbs that are all around. And if you break the bulb, that's the answer. So the first one is a really crazy, what's the average temperature of somewhere in Venezuela or something like that. Something you would never know. And when you get into the game, you break the bulb and it gives you the answer and you know it now. So that's how this tool is supposed to work, that you can use it to know things that you should not know. Hijinks ensue and your dog is now missing and you're on a quest to find your dog, and you are just going from town spot to town spot, being prompted with decisions and solving them using this truly silly Marbleizer.
Which is half broken. That's the fun of the game.
Yeah, so you're going to, one of the first ones, your dog's missing, so you decided to go to the library to create a dog lost.
Missing poster.
A missing poster, right? And you're in the little game with all the where you're controlling the marble, and there's multiple bulbs, and it's what kind of paper should this poster be on? And there'll be bulbs all around, and the bulb that I ended up hitting 3 times to break it was sandwich paper.
No, sandwich wrapper.
Sandwich wrapper.
Saran wrap. Sandwich wrapper.
Whereas I found a hidden little room underneath, and I got thick cardstock.
Oh, so yeah, I had a greasy, this is specifically a greasy sandwich wrapper, and then in its next what do you want the poster to say? And mine just says help real big, and then what kind of picture should be on it? And I got a close up, and then when it's all done in the in this nice little screen, you see the wanted poster that you've created, which for me was a greasy sandwich wrapper that said help across the top and a really close-up picture of the dog's face. So just the eyes, mouth, and nose. And it's really funny. Yeah. And the whole game is this weird decision-making thing where you're playing the weird marble game in order to make decisions. It's often those sort of there's going to be multiple outcomes, and you are crafting the narrative off of whatever bulbs you break within the game. There's often normal answers and then super wacky ones. And I think it seemed like the normal ones are harder to achieve.
Yes.
They're so
I think it's this, one of the things that really surprised me about this is that it feels like it's trying to set you up that there's a right answer here.
Yeah.
And you need to avoid breaking the bulbs for any of the wrong answers and try and seek out the right ones. But in many of them, maybe there was a quote unquote right answer, but it was hidden. But all of the available bulbs seem wacky.
They were all bad answers. Yeah. I mean,
it's mostly just and it plays like a visual novel. So it's not you're if you don't get the right one, then if you put together that greasy sandwich paper poster, you're still probably going to find your dog in the end. It's just setting up a joke. So it's not something where it's you're going to want to restart the game because you missed the correct bulb. It's mostly just you know, if you fail, you get weird jokes, and if you are, you know, if you're really dead on accurate, you get maybe a different joke.
Yeah, I'll say I played through the game, and you might notice that like as you go between locations, you see a little map of the town, and you do not go to all those locations as you play through. That is because this does have branching stories depending on what your answers are.
I didn't realize.
And so you can you could play through it a bunch of times and meet different characters. And so the answers you get do matter. And being it like the second time I had a lot more skill with it, so I was able to get something totally different than my initial poster was sandwich cling wrap that said, "Is this you?" With a picture of a dog's butt. So,
well,
it's really, really funny.
I started to think that must be
super funny.
I was thinking that must be the case, Mark, because my sandwich, which was a sandwich of protein powder, lettuce, and hot wax, the dog did not like that. So but it kind of, just the way it was written, it made me think like, I bet I could, and the ingredients that I saw in the game, I was like, I bet I could have made a sandwich that the dog would have liked.
Yep.
And it seemed like there was an opportunity there for me to succeed, and I clearly failed. I think it was the hot wax that really made it.
That really carried it over the edge.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting, like this being structurally, it's a visual novel. Like typically in a visual novel, you're just making these choices yourself. Here, you're like leaving them up to like you chance and your skill at rolling a ball. It's a really strange hybrid thing, but I think it works for a low stakes comedy story like this. Like, you know, throwing chaos into this story improves it rather than detracting from it, I think. So I like this a lot. The thing that really carried me through the part of this that I did play, though, is the art is just phenomenal. Like it's full of these like visual novel style presentation character portraits where like you've got two people on screen talking to each other with an interesting background, and they get so much detail and like great character design out of the like 1-bit graphics. It's really it's a really good example of someone like knowing how to do 1-bit graphics.
I love Pomegranate Village.
Yeah.
I love these weirdos.
Yeah.
It's just such a delightful story. I think for me, the game mechanic, as I've gotten the hang of it a little more, it's been more fun, but really it's something where it's like, I'm loving this visual novel, and the game is something that I'm so bad at that it
You're
feels
putting
more
up
like
with
it's
the game too.
exactly where it's just like I kind of just want the wacky hijinks and to hear all the stories, and like now it's like, okay, what options do I like? Which things do I have to get if I want to meet the final characters I haven't seen? But
there's a real like horse plinko feel sometimes to this game.
Yeah.
So the last two that we're going to be able to talk about from the season are ones that I haven't played. So Mark, Laura, tell me how things are in the future.
I am obsessed with Flipper Lifter.
Awesome.
It's a good name.
I've only played it a tiny bit, so you can.
I haven't even played the other game because I mean it's Tuesday. I got it yesterday, so it's not as if I've had a week for it. But Flipper Lifter is a elevator simulation game where you are controlling elevators to let penguins on and off at different floors, and the crank is cranking the elevator to the floor. You stop cranking enough time for the door to get open and penguins to get in, and you try to move them down. These are not elevators where you know where they're going prior to entering. They do not hit an up or down button. The penguins go in, you have to figure out where they're going. It is an arcade high score chase game. I think you have to get a score of 75 to get out of the tutorial but this game is super fun, and every level I've played so far has been a really different world. So first one's just a hotel. You're just going up and down, and as you get each penguin you correctly deliver to the right floor gets you a little extra time on the clock. So you can keep going as long as you don't mess up. And if you keep a penguin waiting too long, if you hold the poor little penguin hijacked in the the elevator car as you continue to deliver the other passengers. There's a little exclamation point that turns progressively, counts down.
Drains,
Drainer. And if it turns black, that penguin will then scream and stop the elevator and march off, and you can't move for like a couple seconds of penalty time. As you get further and more levels, they'll add additional floors to the building. So you might have 3 or 4. The better your run is, you might have like a 10-story hotel or something, and just keep adding levels. And then you have more places the poor little penguins would go. But what I was really surprised at is, after the tutorial, the other levels are different. There's mines where you need to go like sideways. And there's 2 different elevator shafts. There's a mountain where there's just a bird that will come and eat you if you like open the doors. The penguins will get eaten. I won't spoil the others, but the calamities are funny and challenging, and they make each level feel different, which is what I want in this kind of game. Is I want to like see how fast I can go on the mountain level versus the hotel versus the mine. So I was just like, this is my version of the Whitewater Wipeout. I'm like, this is the game that like feels like a little game that I know I'm going to spend way too much time playing.
It's
and it's made by Serenity Forge, who also, their other published game recently was Doki Doki Literature Plus. So I don't know what they're doing.
I think they're both a developer and a publisher.
Yes, and they
I don't know what they develop versus publish, but like they have a really big catalog.
They do. But they made time for this, and I'm happy.
I can't wait for this to come on my next update. I'm really, really looking forward to it. Mark,
they also did Where the Water Tastes Like Mine. They were publishers of that too. So,
Mark, have you played Echoic Memory?
Yes, I've been playing a fair bit of it. It is basically like what's the toy, like a Simon? Yeah, where it's like plays a sound clip and you're trying to match.
Bop it too.
Yeah. It's something where, and it pretty quickly advances to the point where like you have a whole bunch of like, rather than 4 options, you have 16 or whatever. And then the like frequencies or speed of them gets scrambled. So you have to use the crank to adjust how fast each one's playing to try and figure out, is this the same thing that I'm hearing? And it gets somewhat challenging. I think it's been pretty fun. And it really is like the speaker on the Playdate is definitely put to good use with it, just because you are really like hearing fine details and differences in the music is really important. But I think the game mechanic of it is fine. It's like fun enough. I don't think that would grab me especially, but I also really like the story that's going on around it, similar to Lost Your Marbles, where it's just very zany and weird. This one more in the kind of like surreal, how are these like Alexa type robots gaining sentience? What is going on? But I am invested in that story and excited to see where it goes.
I want to know how the boomboxes wreck the entire planet.
Yeah.
Please tell me.
But I think that it's something where the like overall then the story of it is just really nicely done. I think similarly to Lost Your Marbles, for me the game mechanic is pretty fun, but it is not like I think I'm more like I am so sold on the story and I want to know more, but I am like just kind of like, okay, another matching sound game. I'll play this level, but I kind of just want to know where the story is going to
go. Awesome. I can't wait for that one too. And I'm trying not to like spoil myself by looking too far ahead on the Playdate wiki here about all the other games that are coming, but I'm definitely looking forward to those, and we'll probably reconvene and talk about more of the rest of the season once the whole thing's out or at some point down the road. Before we wrap up, I know we're looking at we're pretty short on time here. But does anybody want to recommend any games that you've played via sideloading? Anything in particular that you either downloaded from the Playdate development forums or itch.io or any other places that, where games have been available that are not part of the season.
I haven't done much sideloading except for a Pycross game, but I am very intrigued that there is a Game Boy emulator called the Playboy that I want to play. But that just got released a couple days ago. I have to
disappoint you.
It doesn't work? Yeah, I'm sorry.
Well, it's okay. Game Kid is what it's called, and it came out a little bit ago.
No, there is a new one that came out 2 days ago called the Playboy.
Oh, I'll have to try that one then.
So that might be a second one.
There are some things. It seems obvious that you'd want a Game Boy emulator on this thing, but there are some real compromises. The big one is obviously that the Game Boy had 4 shades of gray, and the Playdate has just black and white. And so even though the screen is higher resolution, if you want to simulate those different shades of gray, it has to be able to have enough pixels per Game Boy pixel to simulate the different shades of gray. And it just doesn't quite fit, right? So games either have to look stretched or miscolored. And also the Game Kid that I tried, which is that emulator ran at much slower than correct speed. That's probably correctable. I don't know if this new emulator will be better at that, but I don't know. It wasn't ideal. I would not pick this device up to play Game Boy games if you have another option. If you have a 3DS or something, it's going to be way better as a Game Boy. I think it would be neat to be able to play Game Boy games on here. And there probably are some Game Boy games that would play well on it given its constraints. But for me, I was like, I hope I can play what is it? Revenge of the Gator on here. And nah. Didn't work for me. So I don't know. I'll revisit that in a little while, or maybe once these things make some progress, and see if maybe some folks have found some clever workarounds. Anybody else have any other games that you've tried? I have quite a few, but I don't want to talk everyone's ears off first.
One that I really loved was Bloom, which is it's described as a real-time, I would say real-time-ish, story where you are a girl named Midori who has dropped out of college and is starting a flower shop, and the whole game is told over just text messages on her phone. And I think I was playing it early enough that there was a bug where the things happened faster than they were supposed to. So I played through the whole thing in about a week, which it's supposed to take about a month. So I think that it might be...
That's actually an improvement in my opinion.
It's something where I really love the game. I think that the writing in it is really great. It feels very realistic. It feels very real, all the characters to me, and the different tones and voices that they have, and also your character Midori that you're getting to know better, and you have choices in how to respond to things. But very often, the options might not be very good, or things where it's that I feel no, this is or where, you don't get the option to reply because she's stressed out about something. And it's no, please reply to this person. And I think that's something where just the vibe of the game with the music and the illustration and the character building of it is all really, really strong. I think there are a number of places where because so much is working for me, then the places where it falls down, I'm especially disappointed because it has so much potential. But it's you're running a flower shop and there's a gardening mechanic, but it's kind of entirely detached from the actual story of the game. What you do in the garden doesn't seem to impact any of the story or things advancing, when you are doing client work or whatever. And in the story, they tell they are going to need hydrangeas. It's not you need to go and grow hydrangeas. That's not actually something that's connected, where it's this feels there are a lot of things that are missed opportunities in that way that could tie the different parts of the game together better. Or raising money, it doesn't matter. You're going to get to the end of the game whether or not you plant any flowers is my overall conclusion, where it's this feels like
it's interesting.
Yeah, it's something. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you do need to do a certain amount, but if you do, there's no way of knowing that the flower stuff you did unlocked parts of the story, and so that's something which I think I wish was a little bit better.
I think it is interesting to see this. Like that is a little disappointing to hear, but it also is also sort of impressive on a scale level. From like this feels like I didn't get nearly as far as you did with it, but it feels like a pretty full, game-ass game, the kind of thing that you could potentially see as like a full Steam release or something.
Yeah.
Maybe a budget Steam release or whatever, but like all indie games are, pretty cheap. And this was out very early. I think it came out the first week the Playdate was available and launching. So it's the first commercial Playdate game.
Yeah.
Selling for $10 on itch.io. And it's a pretty complete package. I think it's very impressive to see. So like I hope maybe they take a second pass at this, or refine it with time, because I don't think they could possibly have had like development hardware while they were working on it. They're probably working entirely in the simulator, and that's been a lot of the story. Like I'm on the Playdate Discord, and there's a ton of developers on there who are like, I've made this game, but I need somebody to play test it because I don't have hardware yet. Like people are excited to play around with the dev tools here, but are not like able to actually test on hardware. So it's very impressive to me that they put out such a complete, game.
Yeah.
With good writing, week one of this weird dinky console, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So it gives me hope for the third party development scene on the Playdate.
Yeah.
Anybody else have anything else they want to call out?
Playtris is fun. It's fun just having Tetris on the Playdate, rotating the blocks with a crank.
I was really glad to see that that's like been very actively developed. So like I had some complaints about the initial version, and all of them have been addressed. Yeah. It's now a pretty competent Tetris game. And if you have like nitpicky preferences about how your Tetris should be, like there's options. You can set how big the Tetris blocks are. You can turn on and off the music and things. You can decide whether it has hard drops or whether it has a grid over the pieces, that kind of thing. So like nice little Tetris. And it seems to be continuing to be actively developed. My favorite of the sideload games that I played was something called Bird and Beans, which is a port of a game called Pioro or Bird and Beans, just under that same name. That was originally a arcade style game that was part of a GBA WarioWare game that later, when the DSi launched, was one of the launch DSi downloadable titles on the DSi eShop. It's an official like Nintendo first party thing. And it's just sort of a little arcade action game. You play as a little bird who's running around on the bottom of the screen. You have a long tongue that you can stick out to grab beans that are floating downward from above. And, you have to stick out your tongue to eat them. And they come faster and faster. And if you start missing the beans, they impact on the floor and leave gaps in the floor that you can't walk over. But there are special white beans that you can eat that refill floor tiles that may have been broken away. And then it's just sort of a high score attack thing where you're trying to eat as many beans as you can before you get hit on the head with a bean or you run out of places to stand. It's really good. It is really kind of weird to see a game that is 100% a ripoff of a Nintendo property. And so I would recommend picking this one up before Nintendo notices, although I can't imagine that Nintendo's definitely out there name searching all of their properties, but like, does that really extend all the way to Bird and Beans? I don't know. Maybe they can get away with this simply by the obscurity of Bird and Beans. But I liked that one a lot. A few others that I actually really enjoyed and played quite a bit of. Let's see. Gimme Friction Baby is a port of a Flash game, and it's really simple, but it was quite fun to play. It's a game where you have these little you have a little shooter at the bottom of the screen. If you've played things like Bubble Bobble, it's very much like that. In fact, this really made me think like there needs to be a Bubble Bobble on here, because like using the crank to aim the little aiming thing at the bottom of the screen left and right was like a perfect interaction.
I mean, if we're talking about games that are needed, I looked where are my fishing games?
Where are the fishing games?
It's absurd.
I get that the developers all thought some other developer was going to make a fishing game. I mean, that they are on the record saying every developer was like, well, the first thing we thought it was a fishing game, and we assumed everyone else was going to make it, so we did something else. But the third-party devs...
And I'm kind of glad. It'd be weird if we had 4 fishing games.
But the third-party devs, no one has made me a fishing game, and I went out and looked on itch.
There's one coming down the pike that I think will be promising. The developer there's a game a little later in the season, having peeked ahead, called Executive Golf DX, which I cannot wait for.
Yeah.
I cannot wait
golf,
for.
I think a crank is good for a golf game.
I think it'll be really cool. But that same developer is working on something called Robot Fishing Village, which, just based on the screens that he's shared, looks kind of like a fishing RPG starring robots. So it looked appealing to me. I think that itch is gonna get scratched eventually, but it is weird, isn't it?
I mean, there's a Craig.
We are really close to out of time, so I'm just going to quickly recommend a handful of these, and then you can chat with me on Discord. I've been playing a lot of Sideloaded games. I can recommend things for you if you're curious. So I mentioned Gimme Friction Babe. It's really good. I had a really good time with Island. It's a sort of adventure game done in pulp. Very, very impressive. 1-Bit Pac-Man is a Pac-Man game where Pac-Man has a gun. That's cool.
That's all the pitch you need. That sounds great.
It is. And I would also super recommend You Cannot Go Back. It's just a really varied thing, but it was really neat in that it's the first game I've seen where you hold the Playdate sideways and play it that way. I was really like, oh, cool. You can hold this other ways and still play. Cool. There's a bunch of other cool stuff on here, man. I've had a lot of fun playing Sideloaded stuff for the Playdate. So if you have suggestions, there's new stuff coming out all the time. Hit us up. We've got a Playdate thread on our Discord. If you enjoyed this episode, this deluxe length podcast episode, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of The Short Game. You can find our show on the internet at www.theshortgame.net. That's where you'll find our contact form. You'll find our past episodes and show note page and all of that stuff. You'll find links to all of us on various podcast platforms where you can leave us a review if you would like. We certainly would like that if you did. And you can also find a link to our Patreon, patreon.com/theshortgame. All of our patrons get access to episodes a bit early, usually several days early. And you get access to our Discord, which is where we chat about the show. We talk about the various Playdate games we're playing. We announce upcoming episodes if you want to play ahead. That's where we keep people abreast of what's coming up. And it's just where we talk about the games that we're playing as we're playing them if you want to be part of that conversation. It's a great place to suggest games to us as well. So we encourage all of our listeners, jump into our Discord. If you support the show at even just $1 a month, you get in there. And hey, if you do $5 a month, I will personally send you some Short Game stickers. If you want to find us on Twitter, we're also there at _shortgame. Mark, where can people find you and all of your work?
You can find me on Twitter at MC Bramhill, and you can find I'm currently finishing the season 2 of Bring Birds Back, which you can find anywhere pods are cast, and you can listen to that episode about Panic from Welcome to Macintosh. I'll send you a link to that. You can put it in the show notes.
I'll definitely have a link in the show notes.
But yeah, those are some of the places you can find me.
Yeah, I definitely recommend checking out that episode of Welcome to Macintosh. Great show and really great deep dive into the history of the company. I'll also have a link in the show notes to the Panic podcast I mentioned earlier, where they have the great episode on the history of the Playdate. Oh, if you want some additional listening after this lengthy episode. Nate, where can people find you?
On Twitter at NateSTL.
And Laura, where can people find you?
On Twitter at Laura Jane Ash.
And I didn't mention I'm also on Twitter at Reagan K. That's RAYGANK. And listeners, thank you once again for joining us on this episode of The Short Game.